it's supposed to be really clear that we're going to be talking about Bitcoins, right? Anything but Bitcoin. So, you know, what I like about this panel so much is that their commitment to this sector, without a doubt, right? It's been really tough and it's very well needed, right? So if anything, I know there's some other people in here that are definitely going down the blockchain highway, as I could say, and they will be adding more volume to their business using blockchain. And there was a comment earlier today about blockchain, and just to clarify, we are seeing more use of it internationally. Okay, maybe that's because I don't have the right domestic clients. I don't know, but we're definitely seeing it more internationally. And I know that Angel's going to discuss a little bit. They're doing it in Egypt. But Ron, I sat down with kind of like a discussion I had at noon. Okay, sit there. Wow. We should be working together. We should be doing a lot of things. Next year, we're talking about what we're going to do with each other to help out nonprofits. So I am grateful for you. I'm grateful for the whole team. Let's get it started. I want to learn a lot today. Thank you.
We're going to make this fairly easy and fairly light, hopefully. We're going to start off, though, with a little discussion on blockchain technologies, and they keep giving me a hard time about Bitcoin because it seems like everybody wants to go down that path. So we're going to talk about what it is not, what it is not. So go to the next one, please. Again, we can skip through that. The panelists today, we have a unique group. I'm pretty blessed today because as you start looking at the people that we have, CEOs, we have not-for-profit, we have operational people and consultancy, all involved here, looking at it from a different angle. And this thing's going to change every one of our lives over the next 10 years, whether we want it to or not. Supply chain backgrounds coming from that area also. I can tell you that I have watched this on a global basis, how it's taking off and going to affect the different day-to-day operations of what we do. I made a comment at a CIO event recently that this is going to replace SAP and Oracle. They all laughed at me. I thought, go ahead. I'll come back in 10 years and we'll see where we're at. So if you go to the next one, please. The pace. You think the pace has been fast? Hold on. It's going to continue to change. It doesn't get any slower for any of us as we get, well, some of us get a little slower, but keep going, please. And again, I can make these available if we want later. But what is blockchain? It's very simple. It's a recording of transactions in a trusted environment, right? It can be events, pictures, anything else. And we're going to go through some of that as they explain what they're doing. Next one, please. Again, I'm not a slide reader. This is an evolution. We started off, some of us have been involved since the 80s with technology, going into LANs, networks, and so on, going to enterprise applications. We thought that was the next thing. Then we started going to the cloud. Wow, this is something else. But it was always within the four walls of a company. SAP, migration to HANA's into the cloud, Oracle into theirs, iSupplier portal, always into the cloud. It reached out a little bit to other companies. Blockchain takes you beyond that. Blockchain is how we start having a common foundation. When we started talking, we heard the last panelists talk about ports. Ports talking around the world, suppliers talking to the port, understand where things are, trusted networks, logistics, everything going with it. This one. So I won't go into the history, but what's amazing to me here is nobody really knows the founder of this. Okay, it's managed that he or she, I'll say that for the ladies in the audience, have managed to keep themselves really hidden from this. There's some ideas of who it is, but it's been around for a period of time. But when you look at the numbers and you start looking at what the dollars are that they're talking about, 10 billion by next year, somewhere around 176 billion and exceeding 3.1 trillion by 2030. Think about who has to be involved and what they have to be involved in this area. So as we talk to university students, I happen to sit on the board up at TCU, and as we talk to the students about supply chain technologies, where they should be, this better be on the curriculum. Next one, please. The terminology and jargon. And I do use the word jargon because you'll hear it throughout here. Distributed ledger, NFTs. Henry can talk to you all day about NFTs, real-time visibility, consensus validation. We're going to talk about some of those today as we go through this. Next one, please. So, a hint, it's not just Bitcoin. And I'm real quick, we're going to page through these. Food track and trace. These are industries using it today or starting to use it today and where it's going. When we talk about protecting, somebody talked in one of the earlier panels about protecting their families. Food track and trace, big issue. Where's your food coming from? How's it being tracked and traced? Pharma, anybody hear of COVID? Okay, we're working with APIs, where they're coming from, how it's being distributed, how you're tracking and tracing, how do you avoid fraud, how do you avoid knowing exactly where things went and taking that information and feed it back for good purposes to see how it's trending and reacting amongst different generations and so on. Next one. Parts warranty, think about brake pads, think about airbags, things like that. And you'll see some of the dollars that have been spent by organizations because they didn't know where their product ended up at. Next one, please. Chain of custody. Probably the key terminology you'll hear over and over is this chain of custody. Knowing something from its origin all the way to point of use. And thinking about that chain of custody and how it's used. Cross-border trade, tariffs, and so on. Asset visibility, a lot in the transportation, trying to figure out where things are stranded at, where they're sitting, how they're being used. It can be a heart monitor, it can be a trailer. Okay, look at utilization, cages, and so on as we use those in our industry. Trusted contracts, again, having that trusted contract in a virtual environment that we're able to go back to, one point of entry, trusted contract, and how's it protected. We're going to talk about some of the protection here. And then what if blockchain were used here? Think of some of the dollars. Okay, warranty recalls, just for the airbags itself that I mentioned, $24 billion. And you know who paid for that. What we saw back in the older days with Tylenol recalls, Samsung recalls with the batteries, we don't know where they ended up. Recalled them all and had to replace them. These are places blockchain technologies are taking off very quickly, and people are saying, if I can track, trace, understand where it is and who ended up with it, that's the type of applications we're talking about. So get well beyond the four walls of a company and how they're using it. And with that, we start to look at what's a value. People have to have a value driven. Number one is people think about, oops, can you go back one more? It's process efficiency, it's fraud reduction. Those are the key ones that we keep hearing over and over. How do I make this more efficient, get rid of handoffs, and reduce fraud? So those are the top two that usually come at the C level where people are talking about this. And finally, next one, where it's going. Again, you can go through all of these different areas. You'll see some niche players coming into it, from the Nikes of the world, people like that, trying to take things and turn them into NFTs, to other organizations which are using it for the practical purposes of track and trace and control. So that's a little bit of introduction. With that, I'm going to have the panel member. You can tell I didn't use my Texas accent today. But we're going to use our panel members now to introduce themselves.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Hoffman. I am the founder and president of Blockchain for Energy. I've spent 20 years in this industry and had the unique opportunity to be a part of the full value chain throughout my career. I got to start with a startup independent company back in the 90s, Merit Energy, which is now a very large independent. And also work in chemicals, work in oil and gas with Occidental. I got to do all kind of audits in the field, hard hat, steel toe boots. Yes, a little 5-foot woman was out there trying to tell these big guys, please don't give me a red audit. But what it did is, and worked the last 10 years with Equinor, got to work with Mariella, right? And through that, though, what I think it did is to be able to have that insight, work in this, it really is a wonderful industry, and see the connections, what happens before, after, internally, externally, and that evaluation really got me excited about blockchain technology to start this with other major energy companies. That's a little bit about me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Henry Ennis. Great to be here and also be on this panel. I currently serve on the steering committee for the GoChain Foundation. We are an enterprise-grade, highly scalable layer 1 blockchain protocol. We've also developed various applications and services to include chain parency, where I'm also the co-founder and CEO. We develop technology solutions that help to ensure responsible and transparent supply chains.
Hi, my name is Andrew Bruce. I'm the CEO of Data Gumbo. We're a smart contract network for industrial use. We started in 2016 and we're invested in by Saudi Aramco and Equinor. We've got 38 use cases that we're working on for primarily around supply chain. So thanks for the invites and look forward to the discussion.
Angel Roscoe, Transportation and Logistics Manager for Distribution Now. I've been in the industry, in transportation industry for about 20 years, and I only have one use case, but I'm gonna just provide some operational insight on what I've seen on that operational use case.
Okay, so we're going to kick this off. I always ask naturally for questions that people want to answer. And I've done this enough, but I had one of the most interesting questions that the panelists asked me to ask them, so I've got to ask it. Rebecca, what is your favorite superhero?
Well, everyone needs a hero, right? So of course it's Wonder Woman, but not for the reason you think it is. It's Wonder Woman because she holds a lasso, and that lasso is a gold rope, which is the lasso of truth. And you've heard that throughout today. There's a theme throughout today that talked about connections of people, processes, and technology, promoting trust with each other. We have to start trusting each other. And how do we do that in a better way and work better together? You also heard about collaborating and adapting to change. So this lasso of truth, I believe, is blockchain. It is a vehicle, it is a tool that is going to help us, especially through supply chain, bring everybody together to do this collaboration and bring people, processes, and technology to help us with the transition and transforming our digital landscape.
Let's go down to Andrew. Andrew, you've been doing this for a while in the oil and gas industry and energy industry. Why don't we just use our traditional systems? What's the benefit to the blockchain use cases across the oil and gas industries?
I think you said it best yourself. It's a lot of the transactions are done within the four walls of any one company. So we have one company who is providing a product or service, and another company who's paying for the product or service, and the invoice goes from one company to the next, and the payer of the service says, well, our records say that something completely different happened, and so we're going to dispute the invoice. And so you get these long, drawn-out processes for payment, approval and payment of invoices, which is completely unnecessary. So I think that the driver is, if you look at a complex services contract, and we come from originally the oil field, you'll find that there are 6, 7, 8 different counterparties providing information into the execution of a contract, which is then automated. So you can take a horrendously complex 1,000-page contract, you can put that into a smart contract, you can make it execute in a day, as opposed to 6 months DSO, day sales outstanding, of payments, because you've got to go through the whole supply chain and authorize all these payments, which is, as we know, horrendously complex. I've got a very simplistic example to describe smart contracts to you. When you go to a gas station, you swipe your credit card, you pump your gas, and you leave. And that is essentially a smart contract in execution, because you've agreed to the quality of the gas, you've agreed to the price of the gas, you've agreed to the quantity of the gas, you've agreed to payment terms, and you've made a payment, all just with one simple transaction. And given the data that we have available to us in the industry today, there is absolutely no reason at all why it can't be as efficient as swiping a credit card, pumping your gas, and leaving. So did I receive services and products, make a payment, and get all the benefits that come from that? So going a little bit outside the original intent of the question, but it's because you can go all the way through the supply chain, all the suppliers. And so what we have today are systems in place which are designed to take advantage of the technologies that are 20 years old, and we've moved beyond that. So blockchain and smart contracts are incredibly simple, but they have profound consequences, which we're going to see. I mean, anybody in this room, if you're in supply chain, you need to pay attention to blockchain and smart contracts, whether you believe me or not. They are here to stay. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. If you can save between 10 and 30% of your supply chain costs by automating these transactions, it's going to be here to stay.
Thank you. Henry, you can hold on to that for a minute. The term trusted has come up a few times. Why is this trusted? I mean, what's the framework? What's the architecture, without getting too technical for us? Put it in the dummy version of why are these trusted contracts and what's different?
Okay, I would say that maybe the easiest way to think about this is our current constructs that we're dealing with right now are centralized systems. It's really what we sort of call as legacy systems. And what everyone really is talking about here, we're talking about blockchain, is moving on beyond a centralized system, one that is decentralized. And so when you have a decentralized distributed system, trust is now put to all of these nodes that are collaborating together to synchronize a single source of truth that is recorded on an immutable ledger, which is the blockchain. And otherwise, if you have a centralized system, which pretty much what we have right now in your Excel spreadsheet or on a centralized server, there tends to be a lot of problems that can come from that. So whether that be just human error, could be fraud, there could be cyber attacks, but these are all problems and inefficiencies that happen when you have a centralized system. So moving beyond that into a decentralized construct, it solves a lot of these problems. And as Andrew's talked about, using smart contracts, having tremendous automation and efficiencies in combination with recording all of those transactions on an immutable ledger, that's very powerful. And so when a company goes through an audit, they don't say, hey, I can't even show you this data. I'm not, manning it myself in my systems. You can go take a look on a distributed ledger. That ledger is the single source of truth among all the stakeholders in that ecosystem. So I would kind of pause there. Hopefully that addresses some of the issues.
What is immutable mean?
What's that?
What is the immutable?
Sorry. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of jargon. But basically when it's immutable, so it's append only. So once you do a transaction, it's done. You cannot reverse it. You cannot change it for the most part. It's cryptographically secure on a blockchain. So that's really one of the most compelling reasons of why you have a blockchain. You can't edit it. You can't reverse it. Once there is a word that you'll hear quite frequently is consensus. So once all the nodes in the distributed architecture agree on a transaction, they agree on that next block to be added to the blockchain, it's done.
And there's no central failure. There's
That's
no
right.
central point of failure.
No central point of failure, and I think the other one too that you'll hear quite often, they call it fault tolerant, meaning that if a node becomes compromised, it's okay because the rest of the nodes are all in consensus. So that they will look at that node and say something's wrong with the ledger. That is not the longest ledger, not the longest list of transactions. We'll get rid of that. It's going to survive on its own, the integrity of the whole blockchain, because all the nodes are working in concert.
Could you say it's even self-healing?
Yeah, I mean, we can probably dive into there's a lot of characteristics around a blockchain, and so I think that's one of the things as enterprises start to look into blockchain, they start to learn very quickly that there's lots of different kinds of blockchains. It depends on the use case and what you're trying to do with it. But for example, we can't exclude Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin, by the way. But you're talking about a blockchain that has 12,000 plus different nodes. So it's super secure, very, very secure, but it's completely not scalable. So it depends on, what kind of use case you're looking for the business that you're involved in. But there's a lot of really compelling attributes when you're talking about a distributed ledger.
So I think that'll take us right into the next question, which is Rebecca. I'm sorry, see, I did that on purpose because he was trying to go the other way. You've created this foundation, pulled together the organizations. Why? What's the advantage of doing that for this vertical?
Yes, it's a nonprofit foundation that we pulled together because as we got into this and we started learning that blockchain is not one thing, everyone thinks it's one platform, it's one thing. It's quite dynamic and can be multiple things. And so the pilots were easy. We could put up a pilot and say success and everybody pats each other on the back. The hard part was, gosh, how do we get agreement to make this where we can really adopt and scale this throughout the entire industry? Because we're talking about external parties. So you can't just how hard is it just internal within your own company to make everybody move in the same way and agree? Now we're trying to make all of the vendors and suppliers with the operators all come to agreement on a new integrated way of working. This is hard and it's big and it has nothing to do with really technology. That actually ended up being pretty much the easy part with some great programmers that we've partnered with. So what we found is we really do need to come together. We needed a nonprofit consortium. It needed to be a safe venue that we could innovate together as an industry and start doing. So many get together and say, we're going to create a standard. 2-3 years later, they're still fighting over the standard. We said, we're going to do, and as we do, the standard's going to naturally evolve from it, because we'll say we need to overcome this issue or this obstacle or, whatever. So we agree up front on what can we work on, and we picked some low-hanging fruit at first that just needed to be digitalized, automated, no doubt. And of course, it was always things that were external from the company, and we just started. So now we have 3 programs, up to 6 projects running, some of which with Data Gumbo. And we're not only testing, we pretty much proven technology's fine. Like, we can get there with the technology. The hard part is the change management, and that's what we're addressing.
And with that, let's pass it all the way down to the end. Change management, okay, getting the organization to understand this and so on. Angel, can you talk a little bit about your business case, how you went about it, and what you're doing with blockchain, and also add in there a little bit about the resistance within the organization and how you overcame that?
Yeah. Well, the case use that I have right now is the Egyptian Customs Authority has implemented a blockchain blockchain documentation transfer environment for us to submit our pre-alerts. As you're going through it, it was very difficult to allow the organization to understand that we need to align our data in a much very more streamlined manner to be able to, to bring in, the data that they're looking for this blockchain, change to happen. But you can see where they're looking for information. Of course, the digitalization of our commercial invoices to pass through all of the commodities that are being shipped, any IoT devices that are attached to it. Definitely, that was some of the challenges to it.
And the ROI, you seen much of an ROI on it yet, or did you even try to manage that?
No, we haven't seen it.
Bleeding edge, we're trying to look at it. There is an investment up front here, so it isn't just built on the efficiency piece. They think it's there, but it's more that trusted network and virtual contracts. So with that, we're going to interrupt for a minute. Anybody have any questions so far?
I find this stuff really fascinating, and I love technology, but I'm not very smart and stuff. So it seems elementary, all of it. For example, the use case I'm just thinking of right now is as a 4PL who's shipping products into Mexico for diesel and then going back and forth to ship fuel oil products. If you deal with Mexican companies, they don't trust anybody, and dealing with that, getting payment up front can be a real issue sometimes because they want to make sure that the fuel is actually en route. They want to trace the rail car. Well, the problem with that is you need to have a permit to go into a certain rail terminal before you even ship the car. But you can't get the permit until you pay for the fuel, right? So there's this chicken or the egg thing. So how can blockchain help solve that problem?
Anybody want to take that one right off the bat?
Yeah.
I can say that.
Got it.
So, good question. I love those ones because it's complicated. It's essentially a smart if you think of a smart contract as essentially you're going to kill me for this. It's as simple as it's just a computer program, right? It's like an Excel macro. And so what you do is you go to the various participants and you figure out what the supply chain looks like. And then for each participant has got a different contract between themselves. And each contract, so the way to think of it is, what is the contractual relationship between one company and the other companies in the supply chain? What data is needed to satisfy the contract? So how do you know that the payment has been received, or how do you know that the permit has been received? And how can you prove it? To Daniel? No, Henry's point. To Henry's point, how can you prove it? So you've got a distributed ledger, so each party to the transaction has got the exact same copy of it. So there's no ways of proof because everybody's got an exact same copy. So you get the contract. That contract will tell you what data you need. The data, then you figure out where you're going to get a trusted source of data you're going to use to satisfy it. So then you build the chain of transactions that have to happen end to end. You break it down into component parts, and it becomes actually quite easy. But you have to say, okay, what is the contract that you've got between one or more counterparties? What is the data I need? Where am I going to get the data from? And then you can run it in trial mode, and then you can put it live. The Mexicans are not alone in this. Nobody trusts each other. I mean, that's why we're doing blockchain in the first place, is because company A and company B wanted to execute on a performance contract, and they didn't trust each other in the payments of performance terms. So, as I said earlier on, you've got company A measuring what's happening, and company B measuring what's happening. They don't agree with what the results are, but if you go to the field, you say exactly what did happen, measure it with IoT devices, use that to trigger the terms of the contract, and then you store the results in an immutable, unchangeable ledger that nobody can unilaterally change. Now you can create trust in an untrusted environment, and you can create payments, you can create a chain of custody of proof of delivery. You can do ESG reporting off of it, you can do payments off it, you can track custody, and it all comes down to what is the contract, what is the data you need, and go to the field to a source of data that everybody trusts, and use that to trigger the terms of the contract. Does that help?
It does, and so, and I don't want to monopolize time, and we can talk offline later, but there is a bunch of different parts during the supply chain. So somebody buys the fuel, then it has to go, the BOL has to create it with the railroad, that triggers something with customs, and then the freight forwarder and the customs broker on both sides have to talk to each other. That creates something in that Provetio system, or whatever is anyway, it's their custom system, right? That sends an email to the Mexican railroad that says it's approved for customs, and then it goes down. And so there's all these events that have to occur linearly, and it would be really cool if you could automate it where as soon as I load the rail car and it's done, and it's like, this is how many thousand gallons of diesels in your rail car today, then they go, boom, it's paid, and that automatically creates the BOL, it sends the message to dispatcher Previo, it creates customs clearances, right?
You're getting right to where this is going, okay? Which is not just when they load the rail car, but all the way on the demand side to fulfillment and payment. And, but it needs the scalability. I think Rebecca was trying to get in, she was pointing at me, so I know what that means.
This is perfect because it's the new integrated way of working that needs to occur. And this is the hard part is what you just said. Technology will build it. You can build it in pieces, connect it together. So you can't eat the whole elephant. So what you want today is, I know what you want, because I want it too. You want to like turn the light on and that's all there. But the reality is you're embarking upon innovation that doesn't exist today. And so it does need participation to come in and let's get going, get on the journey, people, and let's go build this. Because it is the future and it's what we're needed. And when you said it's inevitable, it's coming at you whether this industry does anything or not, because we bank with banks, we have insurance, they're all 2-3 years ahead of us. And I'm talking to those consortiums right now and getting best practices from them and learning. But it's gonna come at us if we're not proactive.
Okay, yeah, I want to get people together, because Henry's now pointing, I've got several people, 1 minute, let's let Henry add to this.
What about consulates? So we have to get documents that are stamped by consulates.
Absolutely.
So digitizing the stamps. That would
Picture passports being gone 10 years from now, okay? Picture
Absolutely.
the blockchain holding our
Letters of
table.
credit with banks.
Letters of credits are already done with the banks on blockchain.
I would agree they're done, but not prevalent in all of them.
Yeah, it's not mainstream yet.
So it seems to me that as you're talking, you've got this ledger, an electronic ledger that has agreements and handshakes that allow transactions to happen. But then when you're talking about operational, if you're talking about geolocation, or you're talking about the BOL or scheduling this, or it seems to me that there's a periphery of software solutions that are going to be required to integrate with the
Absolutely.
blockchain.
That's
right?
correct.
So here's the question. How do you create that mix, or is it like?
Absolutely. It's a
It's
mix of
secret sauce.
technology.
Yeah, let me, I'm gonna comment on a few parts here because actually a lot of these questions and comments are really all very much related, actually. And I want to underscore something that Rebecca was saying. Right now, it's quite, the technology is already there. It's quite difficult to get, for example, end-to-end traceability. You really have to figure out a way to give proper incentives for everybody to comply and participate in blockchain technology. That's really, that's the reality right now. So when we look at supply chains, we have some customers that maybe they own just this small part of the supply chain and they're willing to put transparency there because they believe it's going to get them premium pricing from a buyer. They don't own, they're not 100% vertically integrated, but they're still willing to take that risk. Then we have bigger enterprises that are willing to force compliance across all of the different partners, but that is very dynamic right now, and really you have to go to, I call them champions. You have to find the right champion within that part of the supply chain that's willing to deploy this new technology. So the question that was raised earlier, we are seeing ROI. So it's not just efficiencies, there are opportunities for faster speed, for premium pricing, and when there's greater opportunities for ROI, you're gonna see greater adoption that's gonna start happening. So I think we're all seeing it on different parts of the supply chain and using smart contracts to get these kind of automation efficiencies. I mean, if you think about what's happening, you're disintermediating certain parts of the supply chain. There are gonna be certain people, companies that are no longer gonna be needed within the supply chain if you can automate within certain triggers. It's just self-executing code between two or more parties. That's really what it is. But when that happens, you're also probably getting rid of some intermediaries and some potential for fraud. So all of that can not only give you efficiencies, but greater potential for ROI. And I like to use the term mosaic in the sense that blockchain is just one tool in the overall ecosystem. You do have to harmonize that with other technologies to get all the different data inputs. And that mosaic actually builds more confidence and trust. So if you're using IoT sensors and you're using geospatial technologies and you're using other complements to get geo coordinates and timestamps, that starts to build multiple layers of trust, and all of that can be audited on the blockchain.
So I think we got a question back over here.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, whenever you look at like RPA and how it integrates with existing infrastructure and ties everything in, is that going to be how the data gets transmitted on the blockchain, or are you auditing the data like per actual action, or is it the blockchain integrating into the system itself? So are they, because they work in tandem very much with the automation.
It could replace it, or it could.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the question over here. So there's multiple different sources of data. There is not one source of data. So you're using whatever. I mean, it could be a SCADA system. It could be just a raw sensor. It could be an AI system. It could be a geospatial system. To answer some of the questions here in one use case. So we're in the process of doing a project tracking pipe. So in the desert, I'll let you figure out who the customer is. So
West Texas.
They had a huge accident where they bought some pipe where they thought was from Japan and it wasn't. It was from somewhere else. And they built a platform on it, and the platform fell into the ocean. People died. It was not good. So they want to be able to track the pipe all the way back to the foundry of the steel. So where was the steel made? Can you get quality certificates along the way? So can you get bills of lading? You put all of that into the blockchain so that you can prove exactly where it came from. So to your point, how many different systems do you think you have to integrate with? Marine systems, with AIS systems, with ERP systems, with RFID systems. So you have to connect to the source of data relevant for each step of the transaction to be able to prove the validity of the transaction along each step of the way. That can include banking. So there's an interesting move, which I don't know if you guys are seeing it or not, but the trade finance guys are getting very interested in this, because if you can get two companies to agree to a smart contract to automate the terms of a execution, then that becomes a tradable instrument that they're very, very interested in financing. So you start getting the banks getting involved in these transactions to help streamline some of the payments.
Yeah,
So-
you've got I want to make sure we've got a few minutes left. We got a question over here.
Well, I was just, it kind of goes to what you were just talking about. You guys said there was more success internationally with these. Are you seeing?
I disagree with that.
Oh, I thought you did.
That was said over here. I disagree with that.
Oh, okay. So the question, I was going to use the international example, but you could use it for you. Are you seeing more individual ROI? You don't have to get everybody to agree from a consortium perspective. In other words, build it, have a solid ROI, and then you'll see more and more jump on board? Or is it more the consortium model that's from the outset that's working?
I would say probably from a consulting side, I'm going to say across industries. If we look at pharma, they were early adopters, okay? Food industry because of food safety, track and trace around the world, right? And then when we look at other industry side, when we think about conflict minerals from a supply chain standpoint, we think about ROHS, REACH, all those different areas, and the chain of custody that goes behind them. So we're seeing some of the industry verticals starting to adopt it. And by successful, it means have they made the effort to bring it together. In this energy, or in the energy space, probably the US, because of the companies, and Europe are the leading in those areas right now.
But is it, you have to find where it solves the
It
problem?
will.
It's scalable.
I think you're gonna need everything. Because our industry, we've got processes that are 60 years old. And it's going to take each and every avenue to really bring this about. And when you were talking ROI, you can get a little ROI, you can get some ROI if you try to do it just between you and if you can find an area that has some suppliers and get them on board, yeah, you can try and do that route, absolutely. But the true ROI, the really big money that you were showing up here, comes when you have a full industry working together and all your suppliers, all your vendors are working with all the operators. That's when we're going to really see the big ROI.
But as individual companies, we wouldn't mind having the ROI,
Right.
not having our
But wouldn't it be
competitors.
better to have, it's harder for you as one operator. I've only come from operator, so sorry. I only have that perspective really, but as a one operator, a lot of them have gone out there and tried. And they've done a little bit, but the reality is having 8 operators together then come together is much more influential to say, we're going to work in a new way and we're going to bring about change.
Okay, and we'll take one more comment, but Tim, I think, again, I tried to keep us on schedule. One more. Okay, one more comment.
Oh, I was just going to really quickly say ROI is one part of it, but let's be clear, there's going to be major issues with compliance. It's already happening. If you're talking food security, the Food Safety Modernization Act, Section 204D, I mean, in time, whether you like it or not, you're going to have to be required to have fully digitized records, forwards, backwards traceability. This is not just domestic enterprises. These are foreign enterprises that are shipping product into the U.S. Yeah, and ESG, if you look at what's happening this year, how many class action lawsuits are you seeing now that are popping up because of ESG claims? So it's not enough anymore just to say, hey, we're being sustainable or ESG. You have a lot of different parties looking to see just truly how sustainable and ESG you really are. What are you really, how true is it your claims? So companies are now looking at, we need to substantiate our claims. Otherwise, you're going to have not only potential lawsuits, but it's going to damage your brands in a major way.
Okay, so with that, I want to thank the panelists. It just goes back to surround yourself by brilliance. The rest is easy. Cross-border trade's another one we're seeing. Moving products in and out, tariffs and everything. That's an area that seems to be picking up internationally. Countries are looking at it. So you want to move it across here. So that's where you're starting to see niches going. With that, you can grab any of these people anytime.
Thanks, Ron, Blockchain Executive of the Year. Thank you. Rebecca. How about Blockchain CEO?
Oh, thank you.
Andrew, you're coming last. Data chain executive of the year. Yeah. Now, for those of you who don't know, where were you yesterday, Sally?
I was in Dubai.
Oh, Dubai. Then we don't speak Dubai. You kind of gotta go through all the different visas.
This gentleman's going to be going to.
Yeah. Blockchain innovator of the year. I think that's what she